So about a month ago, I made a video discussing my thoughts on the Circle of the Sea Druid, and as many of you watching this probably know, that was met with some criticism. But in acknowledgement of everything, and as something of a challenge to myself, I wanted to see if I could design a build for the subclass that heavily emphasizes the Wrath of the Sea feature, and I mean heavily. Now, many of you also probably know that character builds aren't really my strong suit and not what I typically do on this channel, but this seemed like a worthy enough opportunity to give it a shot, and I think I've come up with something that's pretty fun. I'm not going to pretend that it's the most optimized build or anything like that, but I had an idea that I wanted to execute, and it accomplishes exactly what I wanted to do, and I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest. And also, in an effort to do something that's a little bit different, I won't just be doing a damage report at the typical level breakpoints of 6, 9, 13, and 17. Instead, Nathan, again of D&D Unoptimized, has been gracious enough to perform a full multi-dimensional analysis of the build at these level breakpoints, so we can get a much more holistic and well-rounded understanding of how our fishy friend is performing at various points throughout their adventuring career. Realistically though, the exact way that I built this is probably not all that sustainable for an actual campaign, but would be pretty well suited to some fun one-shots here and there. To me, this exercise was way more about the thought experiment and trying to make it all work than it was about the effectiveness of it. All that said, I thought this would be a fun video to make right off the back of my one from last week, talking about vibes. I've only made 2 other builds ever on this channel. One, the Slurper, that was a complete meme, and the other, the World Tree Barbarian, which was actually kinda legit. This is sort of somewhere in the middle, because I'm confident that it's not particularly good or practical, but again, it was really about executing on the idea and seeing how far we can push it. This was all about the vibes for me. So with that, here we have the Crushing Wave. So when I think about the Sea Druid, and Wrath of the Sea in particular, the first thing that comes to mind are those crashing waves swirling around them. I think of the ebb and the flow of the tide and how water sweeps in and pushes out, and I wanted to get as close as possible to mimicking that experience with the feature. Pushing creatures out and pulling them back in, and then pushing them out and pulling them back in again. It sounded incredibly fun to me, though certainly came with its own challenges. So let's get into it. Oh, and it's called the Crushing Wave, not Crashing Wave, for reasons that we'll get to later. The bulk of this video will be spent going over the first 6 levels, the rest we can get through fairly quickly since our strategy will largely remain the same and all the groundwork will have already been laid. Starting off with our background, we are going to be going with a custom one as presented in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. The reason being is that the only existing background that has the ability score improvements that we need, that being Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom, is the guide, but the feat provided by it is Magic Initiate Druid, which is just not something that's going to be very beneficial to us at all. So we're going custom here. I picture our character as someone who grew up in a remote island fishing village or something, whose only interactions came from shipwrecked adventurers or other seafarers. And he learned the ways of water and other martial arts from some of the people who happened upon his island home. Anyway, so we are also going to be picking Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom, as I mentioned. Each will be getting a +1, and for our feat, we're going to be choosing Tough, because given the nature of how this character is going to play, some extra hit points will be very worthwhile. I also considered Lucky to impose disadvantage on some rolls, but overall, I think the guaranteed hit points are probably better for what I'm going for. For our species, we're picking Goliath, specifically Storm Giant. I've always been partial to Goliath, but the ability to grow large feels pretty on brand, like a wave growing and crashing down. On top of that though, we are going Storm Giant, since this allows us to use our reaction to deal 1d8 thunder damage to any creature within 60 feet that damages us. This also feels very thematic and what we're going for. We are likely going to be getting hit quite a fair bit, and we won't really have another use for our reaction for quite a while, so this feels pretty reasonable. Next up for our ability scores, we're going point by. We're going to put 15 in all 3 of Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom, so this leaves an 8 in everything else. However, once we factor in our background bonuses, this leaves our 3 main ability scores at 16 apiece. Now, this is not something that I'd like to do typically, and it's a huge part of why I said this is probably not the kind of character that's well suited to a full campaign, but rather more of a one-shot. But it was more or less the only way that I was able to make this thing work how I wanted it to, so here we are. At level 1, we are diving straight into Druid. We get our 2 proficiencies off the bat. I went with Perception and Nature since they felt like they fit the character theme the best. Next up, we get access to spellcasting. Now, truth be told, the way that I've built this character, we aren't going to be casting many spells at all. It's just not the intended play pattern. That being said though, obviously we are still a full caster with access to plenty of great spells, many of which can be exceptional in the scenarios that may arise when we're unable to perform our combat strategy, so we shouldn't just be completely ignoring spellcasting. However, I won't be focusing on it for the purposes of this video, but I will make a mention at a couple of points where it could be meaningful but would also deviate from our plan. Also at first level, we get access to a new feature, Primal Order. Here we get the choice between Magician, which gives us an extra cantrip and a bonus to our Intelligence, Arcana, and Nature checks, or Warden, which provides us with proficiency in medium armor and martial weapons. Given that I just explained that spellcasting is not really our deal here, we're going to be going with Warden. And considering our position in the battlefield is likely to be up front, being able to get medium armor proficiency and grab something like a breastplate is going to be very helpful. At level 2, we are sticking with Druid, and now we get access to Wild Shape, which is helpful, not because we're going to be transforming very often, but because we're going to use it to power our Wrath of the Sea feature later on. As for Wild Shape, pick your favorites here. Right now, we have access to 4 known forms with a maximum of CR 1/4. Also at second level, we get access to another new feature, Wild Companion. This feature allows us to expand a spell slot to cast Find Familiar without using any material components, which can be pretty useful in a wide variety of scenarios. Finally, at third level, we get access to our subclass, our Druid Circle, and we are obviously going to be picking up Circle of the Sea. With it comes the core feature and the engine of this character, that is, Wrath of the Sea. This feature allows us, as a bonus action, to expend a use of Wild Shape to manifest this ocean spray that surrounds us for 10 minutes. During that time, we can use our bonus action, this also works on the first turn when we do create it, to target a creature within a 5-foot emanation and subject that target to a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, they take an amount of cold damage equal to our Wisdom modifier of d6s. So at third level, our Wisdom modifier is +3, so we would deal 3d6 on a failed save. Additionally, also on a failed save, we can push the target up to 15 feet. It is worth noting though that on a successful save, we do nothing. No damage, no push. The other important thing to mention is that at third level, we now get access to second level spells. So here, we're going to be choosing Spike Growth. At level 4, we are going to multiclass. We're going to drop into Monk here, and we're actually going to end up taking quite a few levels in Monk throughout our adventuring careers. So here at level 4, we are now Druid 3, Monk 1. We get access to the Martial Arts feature, which is going to be a very critical part of our strategy as well. We get to make unarmed strikes with a d6 now, which is pretty sweet, and we can also add our Dexterity modifier to the strikes rather than our Strength modifier, which is also very important. Our Dexterity modifier right now is sitting at +3, which isn't too shabby. We can also make an extra unarmed strike as a bonus action, but we're essentially never going to do that since we're going to be using Wrath of the Sea at every opportunity possible, but it's great to have options. At this level, we also get access to Unarmored Defense, which will allow us to drop whatever armor we had been wearing up until this point, likely a breastplate. Unarmored Defense sets our armor class to 10 plus our Wisdom modifier plus our Dexterity modifier, so it means that our AC is now 16, which is, incidentally, the same as it was before, but what it does do comes at next level, Druid 3, Monk 2, which unlocks Unarmored Movement, which now increases our speed by 10 feet, provided that we aren't wearing any armor or shields. As a reminder, we selected Goliath for our species, which has a base speed of 35, so now our speed is 45. Also at Monk 2, we get access to Monk's Focus, which are what key points used to be if you played prior to 2024. This gives us tons of extra uses for, once again, our bonus action, so we won't be able to reliably use any of these. However, they can be incredibly helpful in the right moment. At some point during a combat, it will be undoubtedly the right decision to abandon our strategy and do something else, so having additional defensive and tactical options available to be used can be critical. Flurry of Blows will let us make another extra unarmed strike as a bonus action. Patient Defense allows us to use our bonus action to disengage. However, if we spend one focus point on it, we can both disengage and dodge. And finally, Step of the Wind allows us to dash as a bonus action, and spending a focus points on that allows us to also disengage on top of that. It's an incredibly useful and versatile feature that got a big glow up in the new player's handbook. Finally at Monk 2, Uncanny Metabolism allows us to regain all of our expended focus points when we roll initiative, which can be amazing. In addition, we can also regain hit points equal to our Monk level plus one roll of our Martial Arts die. We get to use this once per long rest, and this is a great feature that can also help provide some additional staying power for us. Moving on, at level 6, we are sticking with Monk, so we are now Druid 3, Monk 3. Here we get access to Deflect Attacks. This allows us, when we take bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, to use our reaction to reduce the incoming damage. We can reduce it by an amount equal to 1d10 plus our Dexterity modifier plus our Monk level. So right now it's 1d10 plus 6, which is not insignificant. Additionally, if we reduce it to 0, we can redirect the attack to a creature within 5 feet of us if the attack was melee, or 60 feet if the attack was ranged. This will be a very useful feature that can allow us to withstand some extra hits, given that we are going to be front and center most of the time. It also has a complementary interaction with our Storm Giant background, despite both taking our reaction. If we think there's a reasonable chance to end the combat, or if it's early enough, using our background feature to damage the attacker can be a good call. And if we took a melee attack and there's no other targets, again, our background feature will be great here. However, if we need to reduce some incoming damage and there are some other valid targets, deflect attacks is a no-brainer. It's great to have some different options depending on the state of the game. Also, and most importantly, at 3rd level we also get access to our Monk subclass, and we're going to be choosing the Warrior of the Elements. Firstly, not only does it kind of fit the vibe of our water theme, it's also going to let us finally execute on our strategy. The Elemental Attunement feature does 3 things for us. To activate it, we need to spend 1 focus point on it, but then it just lasts for 10 minutes. Firstly, it increases our reach by 10 feet when we make an unarmed strike. To be clear, this is not increasing our reach to 10 feet, it is increasing it by 10 feet. This means that now when we make an unarmed strike, our reach is 15 feet. This is very important. The second thing it lets us do is change the damage type of our unarmed strike to any of acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. 3 of these damage types are very applicable, so we can pick whichever one fits our vibe better. It also allows us to circumvent a resistance or exploit a vulnerability. Options are always great, once again, and this gives us more of that. Finally, when we deal damage now with our elementally attuned unarmed strikes, we can also force a creature to make a strength saving throw. On a failed save, we can move the target up to 10 feet either toward or away from us. Now, there's a good chance you're starting to see where this is going, so with that, let's move on to our first combat report. Our strategy in combat is as follows. At the start of our turn, we're going to use whatever movement we need to of our 45 feet available to us to close the gap on our target and get as close to them as possible. Once we do that, we are going to use our action to cast Spike Growth immediately behind them. This drops down a 20-foot sphere of what basically amounts to Lego behind them that deals 2d4 piercing damage for every 5 feet traveled over it. 2 important notes here. There's no saving throw. They just take 2d4 damage for every feet of the area, and the spell is also considered to be difficult terrain. So now that we've cast Spike Growth, the plan is to use our bonus action to use Wrath of the Sea. Hopefully they fail their Constitution saving throw, we then deal 3d6 cold damage to them and push them back 15 feet, which causes them to take an additional 6d4 piercing damage. Now, on our next round of combat, we're going to hope that any of a few things happen. Either the creature opts to not move to avoid taking additional damage from the Spike Growth, or maybe one of our party members has the ability to hold them in place with some spell. But even if they do decide to move, the area of Spike Growth is difficult terrain, so in all likelihood, they will need to dash to get out of it, which will consume the bulk of their turn anyway. So even if they do that, it's probably still not all that bad. Anyway, for the sake of our strategy, our assumption is that they're going to be staying put. It's also way more fun this way. So now, on our second round, we take 1 step forward, which conveniently puts us within a 15-foot strike of them. So we now activate our Elemental Attunement for the cost of 1 focus point, and make an unarmed strike at the range of 15 feet against our target. This will subject them to a strength saving throw. Assuming they fail that, we will use the feature to pull them 10 feet towards us, which subjects them to an additional 4d4 piercing damage. At this point, we can take 1 step forward onto our own Spike Growth, which is less than ideal, but hey, it's not so bad, and then we can use Wrath of the Sea again, dealing 3d6 cold damage on a failed save, and push them back another 15 feet, dealing another 6d4 piercing damage. Alternatively, we could avoid taking the piercing damage from our own Spike Growth if, on our first turn, we only push the target back 10 feet. But we will be able to avoid this issue at later levels, though. So this play pattern, while fairly complex, honestly feels really fun and flavorful to me. You've got the waves crashing and slamming our target back and then raking them across the jagged seabed. Then another wave crashing in the form of a fist and pulling them right back through the water. And then that same wave coming in and slamming them back once again. It just sounds so fun if you're able to make it work, which is obviously going to be the primary issue with our strategy. It revolves around a number of things going quite well for us, including multiple saves on basically every turn. So with that, we're going to turn to our analysis provided by Nathan of D&D Unoptimized. Here we have a radar chart which provides us with a visual representation of 5 core elements of our character. We've got damage, which shows damage, control, which is a measure of the potential impact that we can have on our enemies through things like imposing status conditions or forced movement. At the moment for us, we have a couple of sources of forced movement, and that's about it, which is why it's relatively low. Though it is worth noting that obviously if we had chosen and were using different spells, this could look very different. Next is mobility. This considers things like our movement speed, which is sitting at 45 thanks to being a Goliath, and unarmored movement. but it will also consider things like swim speeds, which we famously don't have yet, and fly speeds, both of which we will actually eventually obtain. Next, we have durability, which is a representation of our hit points, armor class, and resistances. We have an okay constitution modifier, but our AC is sitting at only 16 right now, which isn't all that great. Additionally though, we don't have any resistances. Deflect attacks can help to some degree though. Finally, we have resistance, which considers our ability to succeed on saving throws, though it is worth noting that this metric is currently skewed toward wisdom saves, as those tend to be the majority of what players face, which is why it's looking very high right now. But we are also looking okay for both our constitution and dexterity saves as well, but it's nothing to write home about. I should also mention that all of these calculations and graphs are still a work in progress. I know Nathan is working very hard on building out his framework to try and encompass everything that he can and to leave as few assumptions as possible. So at this level, our druid definitely has a strategy, but it's not the most reliable one. Based on creatures around this level, they've got a roughly 47% chance to fail their con save for Wrath of the Sea, which obviously isn't great for us, and it's pretty much 50-50 on whether or not they're going to fail their strength saves from elemental strikes. So it's not looking great right now, but it does get a lot better in our next chunk of levels. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to move much faster through the rest of our progression. At both levels 7 and 8, we are taking 1 level each in Druid and Monk. This means that by the time that we are level 8, we are now Druid 4, Monk 4. At both of these levels, we also get feats, and for both, we will just be taking an ability score improvement and bumping our wisdom to 18 and then again to 20. This will be very important for not only our Wrath of the Sea damage, but also for our armor class and our wisdom saves and our spell save DC. At level 9, we are taking another level in Monk, putting us at Druid 4, Monk 5. This is an important pickup for us here since it unlocks extra attack for us, but also Stunning Strike, which is basically a win regardless of whether or not the creature saves, so we'll also be using this at every opportunity. With the new version of Stunning Strike, once per turn now, when we make an unarmed strike, we can force our creature to make a Constitution saving throw. Yes, I know, another save, I'm very sorry. On a failed save, they have the Stunned condition. Stunned is a bit different now than it was in 2014. Stunned creatures can actually move, however, they are considered incapacitated, which means that they can't take any actions, bonus actions, or reactions. And if they were concentrating on a spell, that concentration is broken. They also can't speak, and they get disadvantage on initiative if they were stunned when that was rolled. On top of that though, they also automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws, and attack rolls against them are at advantage. This is really good for us, since if they fail the save, we are basically taking them out for a turn, which is massive. But almost more importantly, it means they will automatically fail their strength save against our elemental strikes, which we are now going to be able to make twice per turn since we've got access to extra attack. So this is a big deal. Now, the other interesting thing here about Stunning Strike is that even if the target succeeds on their save, they still get their movement speed halved. And considering they are going to be, hopefully, pushed into the middle of a spike growth, which also creates difficult terrain, it basically locks them in. So that brings us to our combat analysis for level 9, at which point a lot has changed, but a lot of it has also stayed the same. Our AC is now up to 18, which is a nice jump. Our wisdom save bonus is now sitting at +9, and our save DC is sitting at a healthy 17, thanks to both our increase in wisdom, but also our proficiency bonus increasing, and we have 3 focus points to spend. On top of that, our martial arts die has also increased in size to a D8, which is a nice little bonus. Our strategy now is identical to the previous analysis. The only difference here is that we're just a lot more reliable at doing basically everything, and the possibility of stunning makes things even better. Right now we're sitting at a roughly 55% chance at having our target fail their Constitution save on Wrath of the Sea or Stunning Strike, which is a pretty solid jump from our last report. The big difference is now we have extra attack. So we're going to spend our first turn still closing that gap and then casting Spike Growth behind our target. We then Wrath of the Sea and push them back 15 feet. Then, on our next turn, we step forward 1 space, we then use Elemental Strike and pull them toward us. Then we activate our Wrath of the Sea and push them back again, but now we have extra attack, so we can attack again and pull them toward us once more, since Elemental Strike is not limited to once per round. So now we're finally starting to live that dream and see that ebb and flow of the waves, which is exactly what I was going for with this character. All of this becomes way more reliable if our stun is successful, since that would make our target automatically fail their strength saves against elemental strikes. Comparing our radar chart from level 6, we see that everything has improved significantly. This level is kind of the sweet spot for our druid. Another interesting method that Nathan has developed is what he calls combat space, which is essentially what percentage of a deadly encounter's hit points we can take out by ourselves. The metric assumes 4 characters and a 4-round encounter, and I didn't mention it last time, but our combat space was measured at 31%. According to Nathan, characters that focus on damage should be in the 30 to 40% mark, whereas characters focusing on control should be closer to that 20% mark. Well, right now, we're sitting at just over 41%, so we're doing just fine. And this does factor in the probabilities of our target failing their saving throws or not against our abilities. Beyond just damage though, we are looking pretty solid. Our control has spiked since we have access to even more force movement, but we can also stun, which imparts some effects regardless of whether or not our target saves. Our mobility has improved thanks to our movement speed now hitting 50, and things like Step of the Wind letting us use dash as a bonus action if we wanted to. Our durability is also up as a result of our armor class boost, and our resistances are looking even better since we bumped our wisdom significantly and had an increase to our proficiency bonus since our last check-in. Overall, our character is looking very well rounded and solid. Now, I'll be honest, this is kind of where we peak. If you're playing a 9th or 10th level one-shot, that's probably the best possible time to run this character and have a great time. Beyond 10th level, things largely begin to stagnate, though we will continue to improve our durability and mobility greatly. Again, we'll get through this next chunk quickly. At 10th, 11th, and 12th level, we are sticking with Monk. This then puts us at Druid 4, Monk 8 by 12th level. By opting for more Monk levels, we are increasing our resilience since along the way, we get another boost to speed, now 55 feet, and we get access to evasion, and also at level 12, we get another feat, which we will use for yet another ability score improvement for dexterity, which now brings that to an 18 and puts our AC comfortably at 19. Oh, and our unarmed strikes can now also deal force damage, which is pretty nice. One thing worth noting is that at 10th level, we also picked up Elemental Burst. This will become an option for us if some enemies are fairly grouped up, and we can potentially push our target into that area with Wrath of the Sea, and then hit a few of them with this ability. This again is just another option and creates additional versatility for us, but is not the core of our focus. At level 13, we swing back to Druid, making us Druid 5, Monk 8. We also get access to Wild Resurgence here, which can allow us to expend a spell slot to recover a useful wild shape if we needed to, or vice versa. Looking back at our radar chart now, we can see that not a whole lot has changed here, except that our damage is beginning to flatten. Both our Wrath of the Sea and Stunning Strikes are now sitting at roughly 50 to 51% chance of success, but they've got a solid 70% chance of failing strength saving throws, which is pretty great. Our combat space has taken a pretty serious hit, dropping down to 29% though. Still respectable, but it is the beginning of a downward trend. Since this build is so focused on Wrath of the Sea, we can't really scale that up anymore. Moving on, at levels 14 through 17, we are going straight Druid, which ends up leaving us at Druid 9, Monk 8. Through this sequence, we get Aquatic Affinity, which now lets our Wrath of the Sea target creatures within 10 feet, and we finally get a swim speed. We'll also get access to another feat, and there are two ways that we can go here. You could go for another ability score increase and grab dexterity again to raise our AC and attack bonuses even more, or you can go the fun route and grab Crusher, hence the Crushing Wave. Admittedly, the +1 strength that Crusher provides is completely useless for us. But it does allow us to add an additional 10 feet of force movement, provided that our unarmed strike was made with bludgeoning damage, which means that we, for at least one of our hits, wouldn't use the force damage option that we now have. This may or may not matter depending on the target and what their resistances are, if any. What is neat though is that Crusher, despite having the sub-feature labeled as push, just says that we can move the creature to an unoccupied space within 5 feet. It does not specify that it has to be away from us. Presumably, this was intended to allow for lateral left and right movements, but it also means that there is no reason you couldn't just use it to add an additional 5 feet of pull, which, incidentally, would not only deal extra spike growth damage, but also eliminate our need to step onto our own spike growth. The only other thing worth noting here is that we get access to 4th and 5th level spells during this run. This could be a great time to swap to something else like Conjure Woodland Beings, since we have an offensive amount of movement to take advantage of it. But I didn't bother considering it since there's certainly going to be a better way to build that, and I really wanted this to all be about the waves. Here's our radar chart again. Not much has changed other than our damaging continuing to flatten as creatures become stronger and our saves become less and less likely to work out for us. Our combat space has dropped down to 24% now. Lastly, in our final chunk of levels from 18 through 20, we'll grab one more Druid level first, which gives us our Stormborn feature that gives us resistance to cold, lightning, and thunder damage, as well as a fly speed while our Wrath of the Sea is active. This does great things for our resistances and mobility. By the time that we are 20th level, we are now Druid 10, Monk 10, and we also gain some extra uses for our focus points, but we can also just end the Charmed, Frightened, or Poison condition on ourselves at the end of our turn, which is pretty great too. So here's our level 20 chart. I really wanted to show it off because it's kind of hilarious. Our damage has basically flatlined here. We're looking at a dismal 39% chance for creatures to fail against our Wrath of the Sea or Stunning Strike. Our combat space has tumbled even lower to 19%, but our mobility is quite literally off the charts since we have a ridiculous movement and fly speed. And again, yeah, you're absolutely going to be better off using something like Conjure Woodland Beings, but that just wasn't the point here. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed my take on the Crushing Wave. The goal here was to really double down on Wrath of the Sea and try and mimic that ebb and flow of the waves as they swirl around our body. This was a ton of fun to conceptualize and to try to make work, despite running into tons of problems where almost every other forced movement option like the telekinetic feat also required the use of our bonus action, and the fact that there are just so few ways to pull targets. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know some of your thoughts and where you would have improved things, bearing in mind that the goal here really was to stick with Wrath of the Sea as much as possible. I'm sure there are way better ways of doing it than what I came up with here. A special and massive thanks to Nathan from D&D Unoptimized for providing me with his analysis. It really made this project a whole lot more fun and interesting for me, and I think it provided a lot more depth to the discussion. I've left links to all his stuff in the description and the pinned comments below, so definitely check it out. Anyway, be sure to also check out some of my other videos, but otherwise, take care.